3 years ago, I watched a man die on Interstate 10 during a hurricane evacuation because he believed everything I'm about to tell you. He wasn't hit by another car. He didn't have a heart attack. He was shot through the driver's side window at a standstill in traffic, and the people who killed him took his bug-out bag, his supplies, and his vehicle, leaving his family on the shoulder of the highway. I think about him every time I see another YouTube video about the perfect 72-hour survival kit, because I used to make those videos. For 5 years, I believed that mythology so completely that I spent probably $20,000 preparing for a collapse in exactly the wrong way. And the worst part, the more I prepared, the lonelier and more paranoid I became. Then I started actually researching what happens when societies break down. Not from prepper blogs, but from people who lived through Sarajevo, Aleppo, Argentina's economic collapse, the Bosnia War, Venezuela's ongoing nightmare. And every single thing they said contradicted what I'd been taught. So this is me burning down the mythology I helped build, starting with the lie that nearly got me killed. The first lie is the one sitting by your door right now, that your bug-out bag is your lifeline. How many of you have one packed and ready? For 3 years, I refined mine until it was perfect, exactly the right balance of weight and capability, every item tested, every ounce justified. And I felt capable every time I looked at it, like I had an insurance policy against chaos. Let me tell you what that bag actually is. It's a target you're planning to carry on your back. Picture this with me, because it's already happened a dozen times in the last 5 years, and it'll happen again. The grid goes down, or the hurricane warning goes from Category 2 to Category 5 overnight, or the civil unrest that's been simmering finally boils over. You grab your bag, load the family, and you're on the road within 30 minutes while your neighbors are still standing in their driveways looking confused. You feel smart, prepared, ahead of the curve. And then you hit the traffic. Not bad traffic, the kind that becomes a parking lot that becomes a trap. Because everyone has the same plan you do. Every human being's lizard brain says flee, and now you're on a highway with a quarter tank of gas because you thought you had time, surrounded by thousands of cars that aren't moving. Hour 3 passes, hour 5, hour 7. The car's overheating from idling. Your kids need to pee and there's nowhere to go. People are getting out of their vehicles, walking between lanes, looking in windows. That nice, organized, obviously expensive pack in your back seat might as well be a neon sign. Someone taps on your window. You don't know if they want help or what you have, and you have about 3 seconds to make a decision that might get your family killed either way. The temperature drops when the sun goes down. You hear a gunshot somewhere behind you. Your daughter is crying. Your mouth goes dry, and you can taste your own fear. And you realize you're not a prepared survivor. You're a resource-rich target in a metal box you can't defend. The man on Interstate 10 believed in his bag, right up until the moment someone else decided they needed it more. I don't have a bug-out bag anymore. I have relationships with my neighbors and 90 days of food stored where I actually live. Now, let me ask you something uncomfortable. How many guns do you own? And if you're being honest, how much of that is about actual security versus how much is about feeling like you have control over something? Back when I owned 11 firearms, different calibers for different scenarios, thousands of rounds of ammunition, plate carriers, the whole tactical religion, I'd convinced myself this was rational preparation. Then I read an interview with a man who survived the siege of Sarajevo, and he said something that shattered my assumptions. The people who survived weren't the ones who got into firefights. They were the ones nobody noticed in the first place. Think about what every bullet you fire actually does. It announces your location to everyone within half a mile. It marks you as someone with supplies worth defending and weapons worth taking. It escalates a situation that might have been resolved by giving up a can of beans and staying alive. The prepper fantasy is defending your homestead like it's a movie. But if you're in a shooting situation, you've already failed at every skill that actually matters. Not being noticed, de-escalating conflicts, having community relationships that mean you're not alone, and having the judgment to know when keeping your stuff matters less than keeping your life. Here's what the arsenal obsession really is, and I can say this because I lived it for years. It's a security blanket for people who feel powerless. When you can't control the economy or the climate or the chaos, you can control this. But it's a lie you're telling yourself. What actually keeps you alive is boring and social. It's being valuable enough to a community that they want to keep you breathing. It's having medical skills and the ability to fix things, and enough social intelligence to solve problems without violence. I sold 7 of my 11 guns and bought a wilderness first responder course, and enough rice and beans to feed my whole street for a month. Here's a question nobody wants to answer honestly. If the economy collapses tomorrow, what are you actually going to buy with your gold? For 2 years, I accumulated silver coins, and at the time it seemed like wisdom. Then I read a first-hand account from Argentina's economic crisis, and there's this scene that's seared in my memory. A man tries to buy bread from a neighborhood baker with a gold coin. Real gold, probably worth $300 in the old economy. The baker laughs at him, not because the gold isn't valuable, but because he can't eat it, can't make change for it, doesn't trust that anyone else will accept it tomorrow, and he has no way of verifying it's real anyway. What the baker does accept, a bottle of cooking oil, a pack of cigarettes, help fixing his oven. I remember holding those silver coins after reading that story, my stomach twisting as I imagined myself in that baker's shop, holding wealth that had become worthless overnight. The precious metals mythology completely misunderstands the timeline of collapse and the nature of value in crisis. When systems break down, there's a window of chaos, weeks or months or longer, where your gold might as well be decorative gravel. People want immediate utility, food, medicine, fuel, batteries, coffee, tobacco, alcohol, skills, favors. In every collapse scenario, the survivors tell the same story. Tradable goods and practical skills matter. Your preparation money should go into the unglamorous stuff that everyone needs but forgets to hoard. Salt, sugar, soap, bleach, tampons, sewing supplies, over-the-counter medications, vitamins, basic tools. When there's no pharmacy and your neighbor's daughter's running 103 fever, your bottle of children's Tylenol is worth more than any precious metal ever minted. The fourth lie is one I desperately wanted to believe because it felt like real self-reliance, that you'll hunt and forage your way through it. Something primal in us loves this idea that we can return to living off the land like our ancestors did. I took wilderness survival courses, learned to identify edible plants, practiced making snares. I thought I was developing genuine capability. Then I did the math, and the math is absolutely unforgiving. Let's say you live in a region with a healthy deer population, maybe a few thousand animals across 100 square miles. That population supports recreational hunting because it's limited, seasonal, regulated. Now imagine a real food crisis. Every person who owns a rifle, every person who watched the YouTube video on field dressing, every desperate parent whose kids are hungry hits the woods simultaneously. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people with no experience, no ethics, and no restraint hitting the 30-day cliff, the point where most people's stored food runs out. The game populations collapse completely in weeks because the pressure is relentless and indiscriminate. In Bosnia, Venezuela, and during the Great Depression, forests were emptied within a month. Foraging is even worse. Most wild edibles are calorie negative when you account for the energy you burn finding and processing them. You need absurd quantities of acorns or cattail roots to equal a single bag of rice. The people who survived historical collapses did it with stored calories, grain, root vegetables and cellars, preserved meat, the boring staples that don't require you to transform into a primitive hunter overnight. A year's supply of rice, beans, flour, oil, and salt costs less than a good rifle, takes up less space than you think, and actually works when you need it. But even these tactical mistakes pale next to the geographic error I almost made that would have killed me. Right now, someone in your area is slowly poisoning their children with perfectly filtered water, and I almost let it happen to mine. You own a water filter, probably a Life Straw or a Sawyer, or maybe a Berkey if you went high-end. You've tested it, the water comes out crystal clear, and you feel confident. Those filters handle biological contaminants beautifully, but they do absolutely nothing for chemical contamination, heavy metals, agricultural runoff, industrial pollutants, or radiological particles. In a real infrastructure collapse, the water isn't just carrying giardia, it's carrying everything the broken sewage systems are leaking. Everything the flooded industrial sites are releasing, everything washing out of abandoned gas stations, ruptured chemical tanks, and neighborhoods with no sanitation. Your filter is doing a perfect job on the bacteria while you and your family slowly accumulate lead, mercury, arsenic, and pesticides. Picture your 7-year-old daughter complaining about headaches that get worse each week, then stumbling when she walks, then her hands shaking when she tries to write, your chest tightening as a terrible possibility hits that you've been poisoning the child you thought you were protecting. The pediatric neurologist you can't get to anymore would have told you it's irreversible lead poisoning, but you're filtering creek water that looks crystal clear and tastes fine. What works is understanding your watershed before crisis hits. Springs from protected hillsides, deep wells below the contamination layer, rainwater systems that never touch chemically treated roofing. And you need volume. Think 55-gallon drums, bathtub bladders, pool storage, 1 gallon per person per day minimum for drinking, 3 times that for sanitation and cooking. For a family of 4, that's over 1,000 gallons for 90 days. It doesn't fit in a pack, and you can't filter your way through chemically contaminated sources. Here's where I almost made the biggest mistake of my life, and I need to tell you this story because you might be planning the same thing. 2 years into my prepping journey, I was convinced I needed to get out of the city. The mythology was everywhere. Cities are death traps. Buy 40 acres, become self-sufficient. I found land in another state. Cheap, isolated, beautiful. I drove out, already mentally building the cabin, imagining myself surviving while cities burned. Then I stopped at the local diner and started talking to people. I realized I'd be the outsider, the weird guy from the city with money and a bunker mentality. Nobody knew me. Nobody had reason to trust me. I didn't understand the local water, the social dynamics, or who to call when something broke. I'd be isolated on land I didn't really know, dependent on vehicle transportation in an area where everything is 18 miles apart. I was so focused on escaping the dangers I imagined in the city that I was about to isolate myself from the one thing that actually keeps people alive, community that knows your name. Modern rural areas aren't the homesteading fantasy. They're food deserts serviced by Walmart trucks, running on industrial agriculture. Meanwhile, I had real relationships back in the city, neighbors who knew me, who I'd helped move furniture, who lent me tools. Density meant I could walk to resources and organize quickly. I didn't buy that land. I went home and started organizing my actual neighborhood instead. If you're already rural and deeply embedded in a community that knows and values you, that's completely different. But the lie isn't rural is bad. It's that you can buy your way into rural safety by relocating to isolation. You can't. Community takes years to build, and abandoning your network to become the paranoid outsider is trading your greatest asset for something that might kill you. That mistake would have cost me money, but the final lie cost me my humanity. This is the foundation everything else is built on, that your individual preparation will save you and your family, that you can engineer your way to safety through the right gear, the right knowledge, the right supplies, the right location, and that if you just prepare thoroughly enough, you'll be okay while others won't. And that belief gave me something I desperately wanted, a sense of control when the world felt chaotic. But here's what it actually did to me over 5 years. I became more isolated, more paranoid, more likely to see other people as potential threats instead of potential allies. I stopped telling people about my preparations. I started evaluating new neighbors based on whether they'd be useful or dangerous in a collapse. I was hoarding when I should have been sharing. I was hiding my capabilities instead of teaching them. I was training myself to survive alone, which meant I was training myself out of the one skill that actually keeps humans alive: cooperation. We're not solitary apex predators. We're not bear stockpiling for hibernation. We're social primates. Our brains are literally wired for small group collaboration, specialized neural architecture for tracking relationships, reciprocal altruism, reading social cues, and building trust. Every human society that survived catastrophic collapse did it together or not at all. In Sarajevo, survivors talk about neighborhood networks that shared food, organized security rotations, pooled skills, and maintained social bonds even while starving. In Argentina's economic crisis, thriving communities built barter networks and mutual aid systems. In Katrina, the Japan tsunami, European floods, the pattern is identical. People survive together or they die alone. Your 3-month supply of food means nothing if you're defending it solo. Your medical training doesn't help you when you're the one who's sick and there's nobody to care for you. The prepper industry sold individualism because it sells products. Every person needs their own gear.
Actual resilience is social and complicated and can't be purchased. It's knowing your neighbors before crisis hits. It's having skills that make you valuable to others and being humble enough to need theirs in return. It's building trust through years of small interactions, lending tools, helping with moves, showing up to block parties. None of that fits in a catalog. You have to build it by being a decent, reliable, skilled member of a community, and that requires vulnerability, all the things prepper culture calls weakness. Here's the moment I knew I had to change everything. I was at a neighborhood barbecue and someone asked if I had jumper cables. My actual first thought was I don't want them knowing what equipment I have. That's when I realized the preparation had poisoned me. I'd become someone who couldn't even lend jumper cables without calculating strategic implications. The month before, I'd skipped Sarah's block party to organize ammunition instead of meeting neighbors who could have become genuine allies. When Sarah's elderly father fell in his driveway, I watched from my window as those same neighbors I'd avoided rushed to help, forming a care network within hours, while I calculated whether showing my first aid training was worth it the exposure. I was worse at trusting people, worse at asking for help, worse at collaborating. I'd spent 5 years preparing to not need anyone, and I'd forgotten how to be someone worth knowing. This lie isn't just wrong, it's spiritually corrosive. It turns you into a hoarder instead of a neighbor. It makes seeing catastrophe an opportunity to prove your superiority instead of a tragedy to survive together. And when I finally saw that clearly, I had to rebuild my entire approach from scratch. So, here's what I do now, and it's boring and unsexy and it doesn't make good content. I know the names of everyone on my street and most people within 3 blocks. I've organized a neighborhood communication plan for when phones don't work and shared my skills openly while learning from others. I've stored food but also talked to neighbors about pooling resources. I've reduced my dependencies, got out of debt, learned to repair instead of replace, stayed physically capable. I kept one defensive weapon I've actually trained with and I've kept my mouth shut about it. Most importantly, I've accepted that survival isn't binary. It's a spectrum of resilience, and my job is to increase the resilience of the network I'm part of. I stopped hiding my food stores and started hosting neighborhood canning days. I stopped preparing for the day I'd be proven right and started hoping I'm completely wrong about all of it. I sleep better now, even though I have less gear and less certainty because I'm connected instead of isolated. I'm part of something instead of separate from it. And if things ever do fall apart, I won't be the guy on I-10 with a target on his back. I'll be the guy who already knows which door to knock on,